Tonight on The Readout.
First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter. Second, the department does not take such a decision lightly.
Donald Trump could reveal the details of the FBI search right now, but he hasn't. I wonder why. Now, the DOJ is moving to make that information public. And new reporting on a subpoena from this spring for sensitive documents the FBI believed Trump was still improperly holding on to. Also tonight, new details on the armed man who tried to breach an FBI office in Cincinnati this morning. Guess where that suspect was on January 6th. Good evening. I'm Jason Johnson in for Joy Reid, and we begin the readout tonight with the silence broken at the DOJ over the FBI search of Donald Trump's Mar-A-Lago home. After 3 days of allowing Donald Trump and his allies and conservative media to control the narrative of what transpired, Attorney General Merrick Garland made this statement.
Just now, the Justice Department has filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal a search warrant and property receipt relating to a court-approved search that the FBI conducted earlier this week. That search was of premises located in Florida belonging to the former president.
That means those documents will likely become public, which would provide a window into what investigators were looking for at the property and what crime they believe may have been committed, as well as what was actually collected from Trump's Florida residence. Both of these documents were given to Trump's lawyers on Monday and could have been released by Trump at any point, but he chose not to. And the reason we're probably going to see those documents, well, we can thank Donald Trump for that.
The department filed the motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, the surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter.
Meaning, had Donald Trump remained quiet on this, which we know he probably couldn't do, these documents would have remained sealed at least for a while longer. In today's filing, Garland basically told Donald Trump, pull up, writing, quote, the former president should have an opportunity to respond to this motion and lodge objections, including with regard to any legitimate privacy interests or the potential for other injury if these materials are made public. The federal judge who approved the search warrant has set a deadline of 3 p.m. tomorrow for Trump to make any objections. Trump tonight is continuing to say his team was cooperating fully and that the search happened out of nowhere. He did not indicate whether he intends to fight the notion. Look, Garland also went full Lady Tyrell when he made it clear that he personally approved the decision to seek the search warrant. Tell the Donald it was me, and that he didn't take that decision lightly.
Upholding the rule of law means applying the law evenly, without fear or favor. Under my watch, that is precisely what the Justice Department is doing. All Americans are entitled to the even-handed application of the law, to due process of the law, and to the presumption of innocence.
Just hours before Garland spoke today, an armed suspect tried to breach the Cincinnati FBI field office, flashing an AR-15 style rifle and firing a nail gun at personnel before fleeing and engaging in an extended standoff. That suspect was eventually killed by police. Let's bring in NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins for some breaking news on that story. Ben, this is disturbing. This seems clearly connected to what happened on Monday. What do we know about the man that attacked the FBI office in Cincinnati right now, other than the fact that he's dead?
It is clearly connected to what happened on Monday, in the words of the man who did this shooting. His name's Ricky Schiffer. He was at the Capitol on January 6th. There are photos of him at the Capitol that we know are him. And I just want to read you a post that a bit of a post that he posted after he tried to fire a nail gun into the FBI field office, but before he went to a cornfield and got into a shootout with police. He said, well, I thought I had a way through bulletproof glass, and I didn't. If you don't hear from me, it's true. I tried attacking the FBI. It's one of those things that he said. But in the days before this, a couple days ago, he was talking about how this is a call to arms and time for combat, and there's no nonviolent solution to this. And also in May, here he is responding to Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman Green, they got away with fixing the elections in plain sight. It's over. The next step is the one we used in 1775. It's that sort of thing from this kind of guy. That's what you're hearing all over the internet. This guy went through with it. He was at the Capitol on January 6th.
Ben Collins, thank you so much for that update. Let's bring in Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast. That is a very good podcast. You guys should listen to it. Michael Steele, MSNBC political analyst, former RNC chairman, and host of the Michael Steele podcast, another very good podcast to listen to. And Charles Coleman Jr., civil rights attorney, former prosecutor, and MSNBC legal analyst. I hope you get a podcast soon. Jill, I'll start with you. This is disturbing. We've talked about the rising tide of white nationalist terrorism. We have talked about the danger that the Republican organization has become as far as fostering this kind of behavior. What is your immediate reaction to this attempted terrorist attack on an FBI office in Cincinnati?
Everything about it is terrifying, and I feel that I'm no different than anybody else, that we have reasonable grounds to be fearful of people who have serious weapons and are deluded into believing that the election was stolen, that there is a reason that they need to take attacks now, when in fact, if one pays attention to the facts, there is not a single shred of evidence or fact to support anything that Donald Trump probably has ever said, but certainly has ever said in connection with January 6th or the search under a lawful warrant of his home. And you said something that I found very interesting, which was about how this was the Democrats weren't responding, that Garland hadn't responded, that Trump has had his say. And it reminded me right back to the Mueller investigation when Barr made a press release, made a press conference. He took control. He said, oh, this says that there's no collusion, no obstruction, when in fact, that's not what the report said. But by the time people spoke out saying that wasn't true, the message had already been sent. And first impressions are very hard to change. So definitely Garland should speak up more often.
Michael, you know, one of the things that concerns me when we see this kind of attempted terrorist action is the way in which these people are directly encouraged, not just by Donald Trump, but other members of the Republican organization. There's a tweet that we've now had verified of this guy communicating with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And she was like, oh, you know, people are saying it's 1984, but it's more like 2016. And he's responding to her. Look, this guy clearly thinks that he was the Winston Smith in 1984. He's more like Fredo Corleone. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of guys like that running around this country, talking openly and blatantly about going to their local shop and picking up guns and attacking government officials. Where do you think the responsibility falls on the party, or what passes sometimes as a party for Republicans, as far as censoring people who are in engagement with folks who engage in this kind of activity?
In my estimation, it falls squarely on the hands and the heads of the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Jim Jordans, the Josh Hawleys, Mitch McConnells, the Kevin McCarthy's, the people who are leaders in the party. Right. You have the title, right? This is happening on your watch. There were times that, when, just dumb stuff. When I was national chairman, right? And they would haul my behind and flail it out in front of the public and expect me to respond. And I stood up in the moment, whether it was someone doing something stupid with the credit cards or someone, saying something crazy in the party. I stood up and said, no, that's not who we are. No, I'm sorry. We're not talking about witches today, people. Sorry. It's not what we're doing, because that's not what the party's about. Crickets. You hear nothing from these people. Or if, in the alternative, you hear the Marjorie Taylor Greenes out there egging it on, profiling it further. But then when it gets serious, they want to wash their hands. They're like, well, that's not what I meant. I can't help what people do, and I'm not responsible for what they say. Yes, you are, because your silence is acquiescence. Your tacit encouragement, saying, we're the MAGA party. Well, when MAGA starts acting like MAGA, guess what? You're now responsible for that. And I think more and more Americans need to hold them all accountable. There's an election coming up this November. These folks are on the ballot in a lot of states for a lot of important offices. What the hell you think next year is going to look like with Mastriano running the governorship in Pennsylvania and Kerry Lake running the governorship in Arizona, and you're kind of going into a 2024 cycle? What do you think that looks like?
I got to say, Charles, one of the things that gets me about this is, look, I've never been surprised in the last 25 years of my life at hypocrisy from the right in America, regardless of whether it has a party title on it or not. But what concerns me is how today's events connect to overall discussions we've been having intensely for the last several years. This guy tweeted he was on Truth Social and other social media networks, talking very easily, laying out a game plan on how he was going to get weapons and make multiple attempts to attack a government agency. From your perspective, just from a legal perspective, what kinds of laws are we hearing about? What kinds of laws have we talked about in the last couple of years that might have made it more difficult for him to do what he attempted to do today? Because that's my first concern. How do we stop the next crazy guy from trying to attack government officials?
Well, first of all, Jason, I want you to know that podcast is coming, and I'm going to be looking for you and Michael to be among my first guests for a conversation. That being said, I think what we've seen lately is a significant amount of pressure being placed on social media platforms to actually use the triggers that are in place to report these things to the FBI and law enforcement agencies earlier. There's been a lot of conversation about the failures of social media to actually adhere to its terms and conditions, the ones that are published, the ones that anyone who's using these platforms agree to when they sign up, where you cannot post these sorts of things where you're advocating or talking about committing violence against other people, against politicians, against elected officials, because that information has to be reported. And so what we've seen is a very strong influence of people basically requiring social media platforms to live up to what it is that they said that they're going to do, to make sure that when illegal activity is essentially being planned right in front of their faces, that they do something about it and turn that information over to the proper law enforcement entities.
Jill, we're going to turn a little bit now to Merrick Garland. So earlier today, he starts off by saying, hey, look, I am concerned about the rhetoric I've been hearing. It endangers the men and women who are simply doing their job of keeping this country safe. And by the way, Donald Trump, I'm calling your bluff. Just from a legal strategy standpoint, how likely is it that Donald Trump and his legal team will actually say, all right, fine, we don't want these documents to be made public? Do you think there's any chance of that occurring, or will they allow them to become public and basically lie, no matter what they have to do, about that reaction as well?
Well, it's always hard to predict what Donald Trump or any of his lawyers will do, because they have not acted always in what I would consider to be ethical or reasonable ways. So I don't want to really predict that, but I want to say, on the other hand, the Department of Justice was brilliant in its strategy. They did call his bluff by waiting for him to open his mouth and say, hey, this is what happened, and here's my view of it. That opened the door for them to legitimately go to court and say, look, he waived his right of privacy. We wouldn't have revealed this, but he already has, and he's setting a false narrative, and we have a right now to reveal this. The public interest outweighs his right of privacy, and I think they will prevail on that. They also said, okay, we're going to give you time before we release this, give you time to answer. And so they did call his bluff, and they are now in the hard position of either having to say, no, we want to hide this, or they're going to have to let it be revealed. And that way, the Department of Justice can take back control of the narrative. And I think the narrative is going to show that he has had many documents that are highly classified that he should have never taken out of the White House, ever out of the White House. But even if those documents aren't highly classified, they are government documents, and it's still illegal, period. It is a violation of law, much more dangerous to national security if they were highly classified.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's documents, papers, Post-it notes, or staplers. If it's not yours, if it says federal government on it, you're not really supposed to take it when your job is over. But here's the thing, and this is my question when it comes to any of these discussions about narrative. Michael, you know this better than most. does the narrative actually change? I mean, the fact of the matter is that the hard right in America has their own ecosystem, whether it's that other cable network or whether it has to do with blogs or whether it has to do with places on the internet, far hidden corners. They don't hear anything else. So does this change the narrative? I mean, who is this play actually for? Because I don't see anybody who's in MAGA world being affected one way or another by facts.
No, you're right. And this is not for MAGA world. This is for the rest of America. This is for Americans who, for good, bad, or whatever reasons, have a question about this process, don't fully understand it necessarily. So this, you have Trump coming out and creating a story before we know the facts, before we know what happened. So he's already telling us what happened, right? Which is what we saw play out with Mueller. And he was aided by an attorney general who came out and colored the report before it was delivered. Right. That's what this effort was all about. The difference is all of a sudden now they went, okay, well, you want to open up that door to my counselor's point here. Yeah, okay, here it is. We want to put it out here, Your Honor, so that we can tell the narrative the way it actually unfolded. So this is for those Americans out there who don't understand what this process is. Look, it's already happening, Jason. Right now, as we speak, there are already signs that Trump MAGA world is coming out and preparing to say, oh, you know what? Trump doesn't have to show this. We don't need to see this. We just want to know what the process was. We don't really care about the documents because they know. Right. They know what those documents are going to say.
Charles, I'm going to just ask you a quick legal question. Look, we know the narrative. We know why Trump might or might not do things. But I want you to put yourself in the mindset. Now, you may have to take a shower after this, but I want you to place yourself in the mindset of a Trump lawyer. Don't do it, Jason. Okay? if you were making the argument for Team Trump to not have this released, what would your argument to the judge be? What would you say? Hey, look, there may be some documents that are of the public interest, but there's also personal family pictures. What would the legal argument be that Team Trump would have to make to justify not having this information released to the public?
Well, really quickly, Jason, Trump has put himself in a difficult position because of the talking that he's already done. Right, but at this point, I think what you've said already is exactly right. You argue that within the documents that were seized, there are personal items that would be an unfair intrusion on, your personal space and your privacy, and hope that even though you've already talked and opened this door, as Michael pointed out, that there's still enough in terms of your private interest that you want to have withheld.
My guests are staying with me, and up next, new reporting on what led up to this week's FBI search of Mar-A-Lago, including a subpoena of Trump that he received this spring. The readout continues right after this.